I'm Walter Isaacson of the Aspen Institute. I'm here with Lynne Cheney, author of James Madison, A Life Reconsidered. So in 1800, they call it the Revolution of 1800, there's a very messy election. Ends up with Jefferson as president, but explain to me that election.
The electors had 2 votes, and the person who obtained the most electoral votes became president, and the person who gained the second greatest amount became vice president. However, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr were tied. And so
they were both in the same party, and they were running on the same ticket, though, right?
Well, the tickets hadn't become that well differentiated yet. They would later on. But right now, they both had the same amount of votes, and though everyone knew that Burr had been intended to be vice president, he didn't concede. He didn't say, well, Jefferson, you go ahead. And the Federalists, the opposing party, launched onto Aaron Burr's candidacy with great hopes that they could somehow overcome. And it went through more than 24 votes in the House of Representatives. That's how you decide a tie election. And finally, Jefferson won. But it was a procedure that left many animosities behind, including Jefferson's thereafter being unwilling to trust his vice president, as one can understand.
And he's saved, actually, by Alexander Hamilton, who ends up throwing his support to Jefferson instead of Burr. Is that right?
Oh, well, one of the things that happened is that Alexander Hamilton wrote an essay and talked about how Burr was simply not morally fit to be president, and that did have impact.
And did that lead to their...
There was also suggestion that it was log rolling, that people were coming to Jefferson and saying, if we vote for you, will you do this and that? Jefferson forever after claimed he had not made any promises, but historians have often suspected that, maybe there was a wink and a deal here and there.
So Jefferson then asked Madison to be a Secretary of State.
Yes.
And tell me about what the role of Secretary of State was back then.
Well, it was some of what we think of now, dealing with foreign governments and treaties and so on. But Madison also spent a great deal of time dealing with job seekers. One of the interesting things about the early period is that there weren't a lot of jobs. Because 95% of the population was agrarian, you just couldn't find want ads, very easily for a job that you needed. So people badgered those who were in power for jobs. The letters pile up to a great height that Madison had to deal with, and he very politely dealt with all who came before him.
One of the foreign policy crises he had to deal with has an eerie echo today, which I'll call it the shores of Tripoli.
Now that's interesting. The Pasha or Bashaw of Tripoli was used to receiving tribute payments from the United States. And when they were a little slow in coming, he decided he not only needed those, but more, and he chopped down the flagpole at the embassy in Tripoli to declare war. Well, Madison and his cabinet agreed that we should do something about this, sent ships into the Mediterranean, and eventually ended up with a land force and a sea force working in synchronization, a group that called themselves Marines. And out of that land and sea attack on Tripoli came part of the famous song, From the Halls of Montezuma to the Shores of Tripoli. That is the Marine hymn today.
Now, he did not officially declare war, Jefferson as president, when they do the Tripoli thing. What was the constitutional reason for that?
I don't think they saw a necessity to declare war because the Constitution said, thanks to Madison, that the president was the commander-in-chief, that the Congress had the power to declare war, but the president had the ability to respond in an emergency.
So this is really the first time we see slightly conflicting parts of the Constitution.
Yes.
We saw in Article 1 of the Constitution that Congress has the right to declare war, and then we see in Article 2 that the president's commander-in-chief. So Washington and then Jefferson both kind of wrestle with it, but up until that point, Congress has never declared war on anything, even though there's been some fighting of the French and the Indians and the British and then in Tripoli. So at the moment, we're seeing the ascent of the executive power of the presidency to be commander-in-chief.
And Madison is the one who is responsible for the Constitution reading as it does. The Constitutional Convention had first considered the idea that the Congress had the power to make war. And Madison, at a crucial point in the convention, leapt to his feet and said, that make should be declare. And because he made that distinction, the president then became commander-in-chief, the one who waged the war, and the Congress becomes the power to declare war.
Thank you very much.